Thank you very much, Randy. And let's go to our callers, 888 Ask Hank. First up, John, St. Louis, Missouri. Hi, John.
Hank, thanks for taking my call.
A pleasure.
I want to ask you if you read the book Searching for Adam by Terry Mortenson.
I have.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on the book and the author's view on man's origin.
Yeah, I have not read the book. I am familiar with Terry Mortenson. I think he's with Answers in Genesis.
Well, he believes in a literal interpretation of Genesis, which would suggest that Adam is about 6,000 years old. I mean, I just started reading the book, so I haven't gone through it all. But given that God's creation took literally 6 days, the universe is roughly 6,000 years old as well, which, of course, is in conflict with the Big Bang Theory. And where do you stand on this?
Well, I don't think there's any conflict with Big Bang cosmology. I mean, Big Bang cosmology presupposes a beginning, and that's what we read in the first few words of Genesis. So Big Bang cosmology can be harmonized with Genesis, but I don't think that a 6,000-year-old universe can be harmonized with Genesis, because Genesis, if you read it in the sense in which it's intended, is not intended to give you a chronology. What Genesis gives you is chirology. It gives you God's purposes in creation, with humankind being the crowning jewel of God's creation. And so I think this whole notion that somehow or other we can figure out from the days of Genesis how long it took is missing the point. We are to remember God's creative prowess during the normal course of everyday living. We live in 7-day cycles, and so we remember God's creative prowess, but we certainly don't suppose it took God 24 hours to do anything. This is not the point. And when you talk about reading Genesis literally, I do as well. But what does that mean? It means you read it as literature. You don't read it in a wooden literalistic sense, but in the sense in which it's intended. So if there's an anthropomorphism that is used in Genesis, where God says to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" you don't suddenly deny God's omniscience. Or if God walks in the garden, you don't suddenly think that God has big feet. It means you read the text in the sense in which it's intended. And so I would contend that this whole notion that you can figure out the chronology based on the genealogies and based on the days of creation is simply misguided. I mean, some of the clues are so bright that they're hard to miss. 10 genealogies on one side of the flood, 10 genealogies on the other. This is hardly sequential. It's symmetrical. So I think it's important that if you follow the literal principle, that you follow it by understanding the art and science of biblical interpretation. And, now at the end of the day, here's my view. My view is I do not want to make this an acid test for orthodoxy. Unfortunately, there are people within some Christian organizations that do. And if you do not hold to their position and their way of interpreting Genesis, and therefore imposing that interpretation on doing good science, then you're out of the fold. You've walked away from the Christian faith, and I think that's unfortunate. So I think this is one of those things that we can debate vigorously. Ultimately, we shouldn't divide over. And I think the quintessential person as a young earth creationist that we ought to follow the model of is Dr. Paul Nelson. In fact, I just did a podcast with him. And you talk about a person that knows how to reach as opposed to repel. I think he is a model for all of us to follow. So I may disagree with him on this particular point, but I hold him in high regard.